Thank you all for coming to our event today. We're delighted to welcome you to Poetics for Home Festival, a digital Chinese diaspora poetry festival aimed to connect and showcase the diverse works by established and emerging Anglophone poets writing across the Chinese diaspora. This event, Voices in Hong Kong, is in collaboration with Asia Review of Books. So first, I'm going to introduce Melanie Ho, the moderator. She's a writer and journalist. She finished her master's in creative writing at University of Oxford. She regularly contributes to the Asian Review of Books. Let's welcome her. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining. I've been really enjoying all of the events at the festival and very much looking forward to tonight's session with our four wonderful poets who all have diverse histories and lived experiences in Hong Kong and all incredibly distinct voices, but of course, they share a great affinity for Hong Kong. So we'll be hearing some poems this evening that illuminate the poet's sense of place and reflecting on ideas of sort of what makes a Hong Kong voice or what is a Hong Kong voice and how Hong Kong influences everyone's work. I think what we'll do is I'll just quickly introduce all the poets and then they'll be reading for about 12 minutes or so. Then we'll get into a short discussion and then we would love to take questions from everyone joining us tonight. So please feel free to put them in the chat. Is that correct, Jenny? Put them in the chat and we can get to them after the readings. So I'll introduce the poets in the order that they are reading this evening. David McKirdy is a long-term resident of Hong Kong. He is a classic car mechanic by profession and a poet by inclination. He is the author of two collections, Accidental Occidental and Ancestral Worship. He has represented Hong Kong at literary events from Colombia to Vietnam, Berlin to Egypt and beyond. I'd also like to introduce Louise Leung, is a final year art student at the University of Hong Kong. They are the second prize winner of the HKBU Century Club Citywide Poetry Competition 2021. Louise has been published by Voice and Verse Poetry magazine in Cha and featured in One City, One Book 2019, The Arrival Poetry Reading, as well as various readings by Cha and Hong Kong and What We Read Now. Born and raised in Hong Kong, Louise mainly writes about its culture and complex identity and wishes to inspire others to write our own definition as a Hong Konger in our diverse community. Jason Ang Hung Lee is a poet and scholar of mixed British and Malaysian Chinese ancestry, whose research and practice fields encompass global Anglophone literatures, post-colonial and diasporic Asian writing, and global Shakespeares. His debut poetry collection, Beds in the East, was a finalist for the Melita Hume Prize and HKU Poetry Prize. He is a literary editor for post-colonial text and current chief curator for Out Loud Hong Kong. He lectures at Hong Kong Baptist University. And born in Singapore, Eddie Tay teaches courses on creative writing and poetry at the Department of English, Chinese University of Hong Kong. He is also involved in the department's Master Classes initiative, whereby he engages creative writers to conduct creative writing workshops for secondary school students. He is the author of 4 volumes of poetry, including his third collection, The Mental Life of Cities, which is a winner of the 2012 Singapore Literature Prize, and his fourth collection is called Dreaming Cities. Thanks, everyone, and I'd like to hand the mic over to David now.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for that very nice introduction. I came to Hong Kong when I was 4 years old by ship, because my dad was working here, and we came from a shipbuilding town in Scotland, and I can still remember the journey because it was such an incredible experience for a 4-year-old, that long ocean journey. And so I can remember it acts as a chronological marker in my life. I can remember life in Scotland before, and I can remember the ocean journey, and then I can remember life in Hong Kong afterwards. So I'm reading my poems in chronological order. I've written a fair bit about my memories of growing up in Hong Kong and my experience becoming an adult in Hong Kong and then becoming a slightly more senior member of society. So I'm going to start with this one called Outward Bound. Hannibal crossed the Alps for conquest and glory. We, adventurers of a different stripe, crossed the sea, destination Hong Kong, on the P&O liner SS Carthage, built by fellow Scots, launched on our own River Clyde. Up the gangway, hand in hand, we boarded, working-class folk with bootstrap aspirations to cabins, second class, the apartheid of imperial caste. No posh travel for us, but so-so, starboard out, staying out, unlike that great general, never coming home to disappointment and betrayal. As we wave goodbye, streamers sever our links, leaving monochrome memories and the 1950s in our wake. Through Port Said, Suez, Aden and beyond, black and white Britain displaced, obscured, forgotten, by senses now shaken, by shocking, pungent, grating colours, odours and sounds. Familiarity growing as we travel ever eastward, warm and wet like a return to the womb. Perhaps I'll linger here a while. Now, the next one I'm reading is called Empirical Truth, and there was often a notion that people who came to work in the colonies were the elite from British society. When you see all these films, A Passage to India and all this sort of thing, it's always about those elite members of government, the administrators. But the truth is that most people who came out were economic migrants, like my family were. So they always said about Hong Kong, it's a first-class place for second-class people. So you could reinvent yourself here, and many people did. So this is a poem about fresh ladies coming out on the boat to a new life in Hong Kong. Empirical Truth. Average women from all over Britain followed their husbands abroad. Unremarkable common or garden housewives from council estates with communal toilets, food, fuel, and opportunities limited. Shipped out from Portsmouth by the pound, boarding with a clean sheet, the metamorphosis began. A tacit re-education from ladies with a tour or two of the colonies under their belts, colluding, propagating, and rewriting their history. It's a long way by steamship from the steam laundry to gin and gin rummy, each day another coating of the thin veneer of culture and constitution for the roll ahead. Weeks later, bewildered husbands met reconfigured, unrecognizable wives with a new accent, new demeanor, the past, past. Upward mobility is easy when any way is up and only natives below. Natives with 3,000 years of culture traveling in the opposite direction to resettlement estates with communal toilets, food, fuel, and opportunities limited, as wind, water, and fate reshuffle the cards. This next one is called Working Class God, and it's about a fishing village in the district of Sai Kung, which is still a very traditional area in Hong Kong, and where the economy is still based around fishing. There are a lot of seafood restaurants there, and even local Hong Kong people go there as a holiday destination. And there's a very tiny hamlet on a island called Khao Sai Chau, and I was very lucky to go and visit there during the time when they had a 10-year festival to rededicate their temple, and all the people who had disappeared off to different countries had come back for the celebration. And the government had sent some archaeologists to the temple to spruce it up a bit and try and find something of historic value there. But for the people, it's their living temple. So these were Italian archaeologists, so it was quite a culture clash. But anyway, my wife's a cinematographer, and she was videoing the whole thing. So that was that was why I went with her. Anyway, it made a strong impression on me how the people's culture, even though there's a very few numbers of them left in the village, they still stick strongly to their cultural roots and to their fishing history and legacy. Working class God. Across the nautical miles on an island of fishermen, by the sheltered narrows of the China Sea, sits a house of God. Built by the fathers of today's tillers of the waves, this temple is listed by the Antiquities and Monuments Office as a cultural icon of benefit to tourism, and scheduled for cleaning, retiling, and restoration. But it's listed as a part of life by these simple, honest folk, and rescheduled for rededication and blessing. For this is no Medici palace for an elegant, effete, and cultured deity. This is the home of a working-class God with work to be done, controlling the elements, protecting the nets, and holding all vessels in a warm embrace. Government bureaucrats, feathering their caps, want to preserve for posterity the muted, patinated tints and quaint, dingy, dank corners. The villagers want a new brush to sweep clean and paint in bright, lively, vibrant hues of gaudily gold, red, and green. This house is not for a redundant god of antiquity. This god requires daily sustenance, libations, and offerings. He is part of the clan and everywhere visible, in the sparkling of infinite pinpricks of light, as a gentle rain dapples the calm green sea, and deep amongst the ancient banyans, those sentinels with twisted limbs entwined in a sensual embrace, gnarled boughs that mirror the stooped backs of ancient mariners, themselves as hard and weathered as aged teaks. Now foreigners have come to Khao Sai Chao, Italians offering their skills with open hands that carry the genetic legacy of Leonardo, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Caravaggio. They delve with care amidst the treasures and peel away the secrets of the years. Uncovered scripts and ancient colors reveal the hand of venerated generations, those long gone but ever present in nooks and crannies, in ancestral tablets, and in the faces of boys at play. The job is done. Outsiders gone. Life returns to the slow rhythmic pulse of the sea, and God rests his feet in front of the fire at home with a cup of tea. Now, I was very privileged to have two maternal influences growing up. One of these was my dear mother, of course, and the other was our Ama, who would have been known in the West as a nanny, who brought me up, and her name is Ame. And Ame was a big influence on me. And she used to take me to see the itinerant Chinese opera troupes, which would come seasonally to the bottom of the street we lived in. Because my dad was a shipbuilder, we lived in a working class Chinese neighborhood. And so all of these local customs would be going on. So she would take me to see the Cantonese opera, which I still go and see anytime they build the opera, sometimes in Sai Kung, sometimes in other places. I always go just for old time's sake. Now, my dear father was a keen singer in amateur operatics, and he would participate in Gilbert and Sullivan operas 2 times a year. So I got dragged along to that as well. So my cultural influences were quite diverse. And growing up, I thought you had to kill a man in a sword fight before you could kiss a girl. Sadly, I found that life wasn't quite as easy as that, but that's another story. Anyway, this poem is a homage to dear Ame. Ama. Nanny, auntie, sister, servant, a simple woman in black and white, not young, no threat, a mouthful of gold, a gilt-edged hedge against famine, war, and pestilence, poor and illiterate, ideal for scrubbing, but entrusted with a stranger's child, a necessity or a convenience for those too busy, too ill, too worldly, trusting eternal motherly love of any woman for any child, leaving her own family deprived of appropriate maternal attention. Myths of hungry ghosts, one-armed swordsmen, culinary treats, and Chinese opera. We absorb, acquire, adopt an alien culture and another mother tongue. These bonds can never be broken. Love is thicker than blood. Ame, ama, mama. 50 years on, the shadow of your presence remains, as the wax from the candle I light for you rolls down like tears. I lived for many years in a Hakka fishing village. A Hakka is an ethnic minority in Hong Kong who arrived here about 500 years ago, and because they were considered latecomers, they got all the poorer plots of land that were still available. So they're sort of far out and having to grow things halfway up a mountain. Anyway, living in a Hakka village was a great experience. I became wonderful friends with the villagers. It was a mix of foreigners were there, Hakka villagers, some local Chinese people renting houses, buying houses. Anyway, when we would often have visitors to the village, some elderly people would come on buses and go down and have something to eat and visit the beach and this sort of thing. So this is what happens if you are living in a Hakka village and you unexpectedly walk outside your front door into the garden and bump into people. Ambushed. An elderly man approached, asking about a toilet for his wife. Such a lovely old lady, how could I leave her in distress? Come, auntie, you're welcome to use my home. As I turned, 1 became 2, 2 became 5, and finally 9, all queued up and smiling, with me handing out soap and towels like a washroom attendant in a massage parlor. Then the questioning began. No one expects the Chinese Inquisition. Forget name, rank, and serial number. These are no mere amateurs. Cantonese aunties are better than the KGB at getting results. Name, age, place of birth, do I own or rent, how much per month, married, how many children? I could have stood a beating, but they were much too subtle for that, calling me by name and talking in turn. I managed to hang on to my 1 testicle and annual salary, but only because their bus was leaving. But they know where I live, and they'll be back. This will be my final poem, and it's called Homecoming. And it's the experience of coming back from Scotland after my father died, which my mother had passed away about 9 months previously. So it was a very melancholic trip for me, and I made friends with a little Chinese boy who was sitting in the next seat to me. So it sort of evoked memories of coming out to Hong Kong for the first time, and so I got a poem out of it. Homecoming. Flying home from the land of my birth, rituals performed, eulogy delivered, orphaned and pensive. A little Chinese boy sleeps with his head on my knee, trusting and innocent. I slide my pillow under him and spread a blanket as his mother snores beside him. Later we chat. Uncle, are you a foreigner? Yes, born in Scotland. Why can you speak Cantonese? I'm a Hong Kong man now. How old are you? 55. And you? I am 5 years old. Just a year older than me when I left, traveling towards a new life. 50 years absence has made me a venerable uncle with an inscrutable Western smile, heading back to my Chinese home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. It was wonderful to hear and very moving. I'd like to pass the mic over to our next reader, who's going to be Louise.
Okay, so this is the footnote for my first poem. So as Melanie introduced me, I grew up in Hong Kong, and I'm actually at my mom's place, and my mom this is her first time listening to me sharing English poems. I hope she understands. Anyway, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So this is actually my submission to citywide poetry competition this year, and it won second prize. What inspired me to write this poem is because I study a post-colonial English course with Dr. Elizabeth Ho, and essentially everything in my mind is about post-colonial crisis. So this poem is to bring out this sort of identity crisis through a Cantonese food that everybody loves. Ginger milk curd 薑汁撞奶. So here it is. Ginger milk curd. The ceiling fans are horns of cows wrestling in steel cages. The rustle echoes of the horses on TV. Number 7 is lagging slightly behind as the middle-aged uncles holding holy texts start sweating onto their undershirts like faded mosaic tiles falling between red roofs. I wave at the foregate for some ginger milk curd. He returns with a bowl half filled with milk and pours the hot ginger juice in. White silk misplaced on the yellow dancer, made in Hong Kong, a compromise. Then the spicy smell snaps the silk away. My sweetened milk usurped, limbs dismantled, butchered hooves. In the collision of fluids, my double vision stands between the borders, unable to let go of what I prefer. The teaspoon drops and sinks into the dirt below. The foregate stares blind at the static TV and forgets to stop pouring yellow ginger into my white milk. Yeah, so white milk, British colonial period, yellow ginger, going back to the motherland. Yeah, easy. So I'll just move on to my next poem. Let me just really quickly share the footnotes into the chat box. Really quick. Ta-da! Okay, so I should share a picture. Oh yes. Let me just share this one. You guys see a picture on the screen? You guys see a picture on the screen?
Yes.
Oh, awesome! Thank you. So this poem is related to my childhood at my granny's noodle store in Wan Chai. It's in an alleyway next to 7 Mallory Street, which is a not so good building in my opinion. It used to be a recycling store, but anyway. So this is me 1 year old. It was on Christmas. I was at my granny's store, and oh, there's another one. Yeah, me moving chairs for the customers. And this poem is inspired by the experience of the workers there, who are actually my relatives from mainland, and their education level is not very high. And now that I have the privilege to speak English, go to university, it gets me thinking about education as a privilege, and it also ties in with my mother's experience because she left school after second grade. Yeah, and she has always wanted to learn more, but she couldn't, and she was really frustrated about it. She always told me that she would become a doctor if she could study. And so I wrote this poem as a response. So let me just share it back to the poem. Yeah, thank you, beautiful Google Doc. So here it is. Education gap. Blue ball pants between scabs and ears. Intimate skin-to-skin relations. Like my mother holding my hand, stroke by stroke, learning how to write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My relatives are ready to serve 凍檸 tea, 蛋河, 酒青. 鬼畫符 on the bills uttered a language exclusive to adults. Her tight grip closes the gap. My hand aches and pains in the regret of her unprivileged youth. Living in the same house, eating the same rye. We're not so different after all. Mother glares in anger, disciplining me. If you don't know how to write, you are a loser. Sometimes in a dialect or in a local accent. I remember seeing the heartwarming smile, always lacking a tooth. Yeah. Shout out to my relative who I haven't contacted in a long time, but I miss them. Yes. Oh yes, PTSD, definitely. Okay. Moving on to the next one. Let me just, wow, this form is so long. Let me just, wow, why is the footnote so long? Okay. I think oh no, wait. Oh, keyboard, please work. Oh no, it's okay, we can just keep going without the footnote. Anyway, so this poem is called 洗碗阿姐, Dishwashing Lady. It's part inspired also by my mom, who also worked as a dishwashing lady sometime for 2 years at a food court. And essentially, this poem is playing around the concept of new immigrants coming to Hong Kong who speak with an accent, like one of those lady workers in Hanzai Samko. And it also plays around a Cantonese slang, 弹弓手, which is actually a medical condition known as stiff fingers, like your hand is stuck and you cannot move it back unless you move it with your other hand. Yeah. It's also Cantonese slang for 干毛, being cunning, cheating, breaking promises. Yeah. Yeah, so let's just get started. Okay. 洗碗阿姐, dishwashing lady. 1. 娟姐 leans against the door to the kitchen, massaging the acupuncture point on her palm. She's been working straight for 2 weeks. No holiday. Only the same old food court at Fashion Walk, Kowloon Tong. People mountain, people sea, drowning amidst heat from steaming food. 三個姐姐 speaking a similar tongue, inaccurately pronouncing 33號. Her silver hairline sheens like beef from Pepper Lunch. 有佢白喎，成頭白晒，不知幾型. The truth is, the minimum hourly wage does not cover her Chinese needle therapy fee for 彈弓手, where your hand is stuck in an unwanted position. Unlike an A-level result card, her primary school graduation certificate does not earn a high-paying living. 2 children stepped from Da Yilong who would come slamming her red paint syndicate. A Lim Zhou Ngok flat, limited space to scream. The entire floor knows who is crying at night for a husband who 彈弓手 slang for breaking promises. Gone bankrupt, gone driving taxi, gone gambling, gone. 2. 喂啊，陳醫師啊，我今晚嚟唔到喎，可唔可以改聽日啊? She knows that she can't just cancel a medical appointment, but working overtime guarantees double pay. Waterproof gloves rub against the grease of the lunch rush hour. Sounds like scratched records. Dark green scarring pad, lemon-scented dish soap, in piss-color curry sauce, the remains of beef belly sliding off into the waste. This person is picky. Green pepper dives into the bottom of the waste bin. The image of her children, her only comfort at this hour, shows up on the phone call. 阿媽，我聽日早收咗啊，帶你去食西餐好唔好啊? Between sandpaper lips, she mutters, "Ho, ho," accented Cantonese for good, good. 早似彈弓手 on 陳醫師 again. Next to the towering place, the phone is calm. Her wrinkled smile lasts. Back to work. Oh, an audiobook. Oh, interesting idea. I'll consider that. Okay, so this is my last poem. Is has something to do with the Chinese religious tradition. First 115. Basically, 初一十五 on the first day and the 15th day of each month in the lunar calendar. Chinese people would honor their ancestors, but there is a set of rules to follow. So first, you must honor the 天地父母, also known as the parents of the land and sky, because essentially you have to pay tribute to them because they are your parents, they are nature, they nurture you, something like that. And then there's also 土地公, Lord of the soil, because he takes care of your family, he bless you with safety. So essentially his family too, right? And then there's also a lot of domestic deity, stuff like that. So this poem is just me ranting on how nonsense I think Hong Kong's entire concept of being open and closed-minded at the same time is. Anyway, first 115. Grandfather burns paper money every 初一十五. First one is always 天地父母, Skyland Daddy Mommy. Then comes 土地公, Third Land Grandpa. Almost sounds like a family gathering. Filial piety is determined by how much you offer. 冇家用, then you 冇撚用. 冇慳, then 冇情感. You can't accuse them of emotional blackmail because 1. You owe them too much. 2. Society expects you not to 小心雷公 hit 教you. 滿身多 God, like God dog, degraded, reduced to stickers, like the ones on your MacBook saying, I am a hoarder. 此地無銀300兩. The point of making a statement is to A. Compensate the lack of an identity. B. Resist against cultural erasure. C. Just because I can hashtag Hong Kong. Burning Beans, the Mingtong ATM, opens only twice a month. Ancestors queue like the living, the dead of this city only want your cash. Grandfather burns George paper for 祖宗18代 to remember our origins. Home is ABC. Yet abandoned because communism. 2. A British colony. 3. Authenticity, bonding, commitment. That's all. Thank you. Let me just end my stream. Yay. Let me drink my malted soil milk like a true Hong Konger.
Thank you, Louise. I think, like everyone, it's tremendous, and we all enjoyed it so much. Thank you. I'd like to pass it over now to Jason. Thank you, Jason.
Wow. So Louise has completely set the high standard for me to follow, and I really can't, because I'm A, monolingual, B, still coming to terms how I can write about Hong Kong, my home now for 15 years, and C, thinking about how I can be true to myself and my own poetics. So what I do is, if you don't mind, I'll share a couple of photos, because in the past couple of months, I've been very much inspired by photos that I've been taking when I've been traveling with my family around Hong Kong. And this for me is a kind of coping mechanism, because like many of my poet friends, you know, it's been a very tough time, and trying to reconcile, you know, the aspirations and hopes for the city and being able to write about it can sometimes be at odds. So I'm going to try and read some new poems that will hopefully form the fulcrum of my second collection, Hong Kongopoly, which is about 75% done. And my style is very, I would say, quite orthodox, but what I've tried to do in this collection is I've tried to make it stylistically a little bit different in terms of thinking about the concept of wistfulness and nostalgia, but also melancholy. So I've been trying to kind of project my own melancholy and my own frustrated feelings, you know, as I begin to enter middle age onto my poetry. So apologies if it's slightly negative. I don't mean to be that way. So can I share? Is that okay? Melanie, have you given me sharing?
I don't.
You should be able to.
Doesn't say anything about that. It's not a big deal if I can't share it. They're just photos. They're more for me than for you, actually. So I'll just read, and you'll just have to imagine the place, I guess. So the first poem that I'll read is it's called Cycling to Daimedok. And Daimedok, if many of you guys know, is right on the end of the long cycling path that you can take from Shatien all the way up past Taipo. So this was one of the kind of retreats that I would frequently engage in with my son. Cycling to Daimedok. It's all quiet here at the end of the world, where the bays and hills part to admit the waters. And having spent all day to get here, you raise your foot off the pedal to survey the sights, enjoy the breeze. It's all a rolling world of motion. Behind, a distant silhouette of Guanyin, goddess of mercy. Ahead, straight white lines mark out one journey through life, with no complicated routes or sudden ends. Closer to the reservoir, the seas engulf your senses. The mirage of azure and gold draws your mind out, and the wheat sheaves bend effortlessly either side, as though longing to embrace the rocks, the shoreline. And as your own tumultuous desires fade, you lose yourself to this temporary solace, seeing the pleasure barges and pedal boats lapping idly, as the fisherfolk resign themselves to their task. Affectionate couples still wander, arm in arm, an early glint of spring in their eyes perhaps, or the promise of a self finally reawakened, like a kite that pulled you off your habitual feet into the air. You stare out at that verdant landscape wistfully, knowing all you've given up, what you'll give up still. And as you turn inward again, so another boy puts his legs to the wheels to accelerate out of you, out of your sight, into the horizon. So the poem really is basically about me trying to reconcile being a dad. And, you know, as my son begins to demand more and more of my time and life force, it's my way of trying to reconcile the landscape of Hong Kong with my own situation in life. So the next poem that I'll read is, it was actually commissioned by Eddie, thank you Eddie, to write about a particular place in Hong Kong and share it with a counterpart in Singapore. And I thought about, you know, whether I should include a place that was, you know, kind of representative of kitsch Hong Kong, you know, the kind of Hong Kong that we see on the tourist brochure. And I thought, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but I had to kind of put a spin on it. So I wanted to write about a particular place that I enjoy going to in Diamond Hill, the garden of Nan Lian, which is very beautiful during the sunset and actually quite empty. So it was one of the places where I would go to when I wanted to kind of regain my thoughts amidst the kind of the chaos that was Hong Kong. So this one is Sunset at Nan Lian. At day's end, you find your way here again, as if in ghostly afterthought, unburdening yourself at the temple gates in slow ritual easing of your fears. And why have you come here? What do you seek in these bowers that call you from yourself? Between columns of stone and bonsai trees, you repeat familiar paths round the mind's pavilion. All is in order here. All is set right. The wind coursing gently across rooftops, the strength of stone up against banyan and pine, the clouds all white and luminous. And after the sun descends, even the cricket stops to dwell in the eeriness. The shadows fall as roots thicken beneath your feet, and the lily pond engulfs you in its solitude, until you find yourself truly alone at last, at the center of your world, wondering at the point of it all, the love and pain you keep locked within you still. The zither and flute from loudspeakers lower to a conspiratorial echo, bringing forth past sorrows and remembrances. Is this your own song breaking free from your head? Still, your elegies will not come out of hiding. Beyond, no distant mountains now, but human tenements, 1,000 souls trapped like fireflies in their own lights, lost and helpless against night's infinite gloom. You turn, wondering if you will ever find your peace. And then, Despite the imperfection of your surroundings, you sense it. The slanting rock, the rushing waters, the symmetry of branches bowing in submission. Between the harmony of this wood and the monumental numbness you have suffered, you can no longer deny the keening of your heart, what you feel inside this raging city. So that was, again, a very fairly wistful, melancholic poem. One of the things I've tried to do, now that I've been here for so long, is trying to work with the aesthetic of Mujo, impermanence. And I hope to kind of put a lot of that in the collection, just to kind of map out how I feel about Hong Kong at this moment in time. But what I also want to do is I also want to kind of talk about, the professions and the people that I encounter. So this poem is based on the kind of prototype of the night watchman. Okay, we all kind of see these figures ambling around Hong Kong in the early hours of the morning. So this one is called, quite simply, The Night Watchman. Again, the old man's shift, the scuffle of rats, my only company, and the Sunday races across my lap, the boxed up screens, a lesson in stillness. Stalking the lone corridors, I hum a tune on patrol, recite the classics, maybe a hacking cough for an hour to keep the silence at bay. What else but the late night teens high from parting, the mutinous roar of a truck on its rounds, or the sirens ablaze for a breath stopped short from boredom. I can't wait to be rid of the night, the morning's heavy eyelids rolling by, like the first shock of delivery. And the birds, oh, the lovely birds. When dawn punctures my final hour, their shrill gloating will revive me as I drag my haggard, bone-worn self home, each hushed step echoing like death behind me. Well, this really is a kind of shout out to, the overworked and underpaid senior citizens of this territory. And I think we see them everywhere. And obviously they can be very invisible at times. The fourth poem that I'd like to read is one of the earlier poems about Hong Kong that was published. And it's an attempt to try and reconcile the idea of finding nature within the concrete jungle that we call Hong Kong. So I call this The Green Heart. The Green Heart. Here, no one listens to the rain, its nourishing sibilances. No butterfly flies between cars threading tales of transformation. No wind blows through streets, ferrying love messages between poplars. And no stone monument commemorates the heart's condition. Here, each tree comprises its own island, and each person is their own castaway. Yet I harbor a secret that none shall take from me. In the will of wild murmurings that break through wind, water, stone, I shall never admit defeat in this city's concrete sea, where no voice sounds in the deep from the depths of traffic jams. And as the night solidifies and heaps its heavy weight upon my soul, my green heart starts to thump within and will go on thumping, and only I shall ever hear it sing. This is a poem very much inspired by a collection by Octavio Paz, and that was a kind of rider for the poem. The last poem that I'll read then is something of a love poem, but it plays on the idea of the butterfly, which obviously, if you know your story, there's the concept of Taoism contained in that. But I also wanted to use that to talk about the transience of love and of the relations that we have with each other in this city. So I'll end with this poem called, quite simply, Butterfly. A butterfly came to me once upon the wind, trailing silken spectres. the beautiful thing that held itself fragile in the night and was all the more so. And I opened my hands up to her, feeling her soft flutter of wings, like a promise, unaware of itself, like a light wreathed in shadows. But I, whose years are the rolling of worlds, would yield too much a lifetime for her. I would cocoon her once again in my embrace, if only for a while. Or yet do not go, sweet butterfly, lest your light be extinguished in the perilous night, for I would have you make me feel the beautiful, transient thing. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed the poems.
Thank you, Jason. Really evocative, and very much looking forward to your next collection when it comes out, when you're finished with it. And finally, I'd like to hand over to Eddie, who will close out the reading section of this session. Thank you.
I'd just like to share my screen here. PDF file. Okay, so I mean, for me, poetry is always about images, and I think, you know, for me, because I'm in Hong Kong, I've been in Hong Kong since 2003, so it's almost 18 years now. And I guess to some extent, you know, I think of myself as coming from two different places, Singapore and Hong Kong. And I'm always interested in the differences. You know, when I go to Singapore and then when I come back here, it sometimes feels very surreal, because people would say like Singapore and Hong Kong are, you know, to some extent very similar because of capitalism, English language, and all of that. But it's quite different. And I always feel that, you know, normally at the first few moments of touchdown, when I touched down in Singapore or in Hong Kong, it all feels very surreal. You know, the strangeness of it all kind of envelops me. And this is kind of the kind of feeling I try to capture in my writing. So I think of how, you know, I mean, I'm interested in photography as well. I do a bit of street photography, and you know, my collection, Dreaming Cities, is very much a collection of photographs as well as poetry. So and there's a lot of relationship between my kind of writing and language and the visual image and all of that. So this is where I'm coming from. And I'm interested in the mood of everyday life, the mood of a particular scene as well. So like this particular photograph, it's on a bus, a double-decker bus, right? And you could see that. And I'm sort of sitting across from him, and he looked really interesting. And, you know, he's deep in thought, looking out the window. And I just, you know, took that picture of him. And I found that it's actually quite interesting, and it's a kind of the mood is kind of grungy, you know. I mean, I'm of course just reading, you know, the scene here, but he's grungy, and his sort of the hairstyle is interesting. At the same time, he's very contemplative, you know. So I like that mood quite a lot, and I think this is a little bit of what Hong Kong is about. Sometimes the environment can be grungy, and yeah, this is a Hong Kong that really thinks about itself a lot as well. So, I mean, the poem that came out of it, it's a, you know, like a dreamscape of sorts, you know. And I tend to, sometimes the poems I write, they come together and the meaning would emerge. Sometimes the meaning is a bit elusive. And I think this is a poem that kind of, it's somewhere in between. On the one hand, there is a kind of meaning coming up. On the other hand, I think of it as consisting of like dreams, fragments of thoughts, desires, passions, ambitions, disappointments of people in the city. So how Hong Kong works. How Hong Kong works, no one knows, though everyone says, Ngoy, Ngoy, thank you, small favor, another name for waiter, excuse me, help. It's excessive when one says Ngoy Sai at a pedestrian crossing. We simply turn and go. How at the end of the day is the numbers that meet. A shiny car going too fast, the bottom line, a business suit, a kind of bright, easy love making sense between Tony Leung and Maggie Cheung. Tony Leung and Maggie Cheung, we ready our mouths for the vowels. Those easy rhymes between money, cha chan tang, fame, a Coach handbag, happiness in a teacup. Hi in Cantonese is a vulgarity. Lei ho, a politeness among colleagues. Ni hao these days is an estate agent greeting a mainland buyer. Why? Over the phone preempts the unsolicited sales call. Why? Why do you call me? How Hong Kong works, no one knows. Though everyone says, Goy, Goy, thank you, small favor, another name for waiter, excuse me, help. It's excessive when one says Goy Sai at a pedestrian crossing. We simply turn and go. How at the end of the day, we all wait to enter a building. The locked door to the corner office opens and we will hear, well done, come in, good, good, thank you, hello, goodbye. So the next poem, Glass City, I think this landscape is quite recognizable. This is central. One of the footbridges, and if you just look up, and we are all sort of, I think all these skyscrapers, very shiny, glassy skyscrapers are just towering over us. And and to some extent, it's kind of like swimming. I think of glass, I think of swimming, and this is how the poem emerged for me. And it's to some extent, it is a kind of alienation as well. That the glass buildings represent capitalism, money, and all of that. So the poem, came from this image. Glass City. Sometimes I think the glass of buildings fluid. I dream of swimming away. Who wouldn't fancy in the name the letters, titles of buildings? I dream of swimming away. Who wouldn't stop and stay rooted like trees bending by the tarmac in Singapore, Hong Kong, Taipei, Beijing? Sometimes I think the glass of buildings fluid, and I swim to hear the silence of bodies underwater. Next poem, Fence. This is the around the West Kowloon area, and I was just walking around and I took this photograph. You can recognize this, the buildings, there's the elements area. But I think the light was interesting because when I turned it into black and white, the buildings look sort of far away and a bit vague and blurry. While it is the fence that's right, in front of us, and it's the barrier of sorts. And I thought the fence was kind of pretty and beautiful, and yet at the same time, it's kind of scary, I guess. Okay, so this is a poem about ambitions. Fence, skyscrapers, all eyes looking at the center. Henry aspires to Harvard business and throws away his harmonica. Jenny is driving a car into a global spider network future. Jonah unfurls like a creased carpet on the 8th floor to watch Voodoo TV. Someone is working on the tablet CV, on winning beans and influencing people. Dorcas must pass her ABRSM. She bangs a piano or else her mother. Skyscrapers, fence, all eyes looking. Okay, the next poem, it's there are no pictures, but this is about language. To some extent, it is about, sometimes it's kind of my experience in Hong Kong that, in the end, there are different kinds, different ways of being Chinese. And sometimes who I am is just kind of hard to explain in a very shorthand manner. And, and that poem comes out of this. And it's also part of my attempt to learn Cantonese as well. At a dim sum restaurant, you need to ask for la jiu jiang chili sauce, la jiu yao chili oil, or tao ban jiang bean paste sauce, depending on your preference. Try not to use Cantonese after you saying hi. After saying hi, if you're paranoid and unsure because it's a root word in Cantonese. Siu mei is not siu mai. San fu, priest. San fu, new pants. San fu, uncomfortable, difficult. If you're not sure, just ask for ha gao, siu mai, and char siu bao. And certainly not phoenix claws unless you like unmanicured chicken feet, which I do actually. I'm usually given a Chinese menu because I'm visibly Chinese, because I speak Mandarin, though it's called Putonghua in Hong Kong, better than Cantonese. I may be mistaken for a mainland Chinese person, but because I took Chinese as a second language in school and scraped by to get into university, I can barely recognize the traditional Chinese characters, because in Singapore, we use simplified script. It's too complicated to explain all this to the confused, irritated waiter in Cantonese or Putonghua, so I usually go with Ha Gao, Siu Mai, and Cha Siu Bao. Siu Mei is not Siu Mai, San Fu, priest. San Fu, new pants. San Fu, uncomfortable, difficult. The next poem, Hong Kong Village. I mean, I live in a village house, but at the same time, I mean, the title also infers that Hong Kong is kind of a village, right? It's a small, very compressed, very densely packed place. And it alludes to the New Year, riot or social unrest in Hong Kong in 2016. So that's what it's about, Hong Kong Village. At the next village house, there's a rooftop barbecue going on. I could hear the clinking of wine glasses, smell the meat-scented smoke. They call this yan hei, human breath. And of course, noise is always better than silence, especially when someone sets off firecrackers at midnight during Chinese New Year. There are teenagers loitering about, and there's always a boy with a homemade motorized skateboard cruising around. The dogs here are big and sometimes loud. Someone has left a note on my car's windscreen. The entire village's parking area is to be used for a lion dance performance this Sunday, and I'm to call to check where to park. The Chinese New Year riot in Hong Kong is on the news. People are still being arrested. Noise is always better than silence. They call this yan hei, human breath. Where there's smoke, there's fire. All those hellos, good mornings, BBQs, scuffles, shots fired, blood, neighbors, community. We make it up as we go along. I mean, the violence and all of that, right, is all on the news. But I thought to just contrast this with a bit of hope as well. And I think the sense of hope, the sense of community is there. And I guess, this is my way of looking at Hong Kong, right? When there's always hope. There's always tranquility to seek after. The last set of poems is about Sam Shui Po. And this is just my sense of the place. It's a poem that about attempting to work through the landscape, to think about the various scenes that I experienced at Sam Shui Po. I am propped with characters, a folded newspaper I have yet to learn to read. I walk, and each forehead is a tangle of furry anxieties, vegetable hopes, shrink-wrapped video desires. Some of them are tied to prices of walls and ceilings, some to siu mai and curry fish balls, and some to vintage cameras and cardboard boxes. The pillar holds many prices. I do not know what I sell, but I know I'm already selling myself. The person is a silhouette we never get to see. He does not see us. He looks at the street with eyes different from ours. I dare not smile at him. That's the photograph that inspired the poem. The mind wanders like a discarded plastic wrapper caught in a tiny whirlwind of tarmac. There's a dream of minds you cannot understand, one where the cat sleeps and is king. The scene is bloodless, but stories of hardship, like torn clothing, cannot be bloodless. The caged homes are hidden from the night watchman. A nightmare bodies in bed prefer not to have. The last bit here. I'm a few steps behind what I see, and I hope my cup is full enough for an art that remains thirsty. Outside the photograph, behind me, is an unwashed old man sitting on a yellowing mattress. He does not ask for coins. I do not know how to speak to him. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such sharp observations and really powerful poems. Thank you. I just had a few questions, and then I also thought I would turn it over to anyone who also had questions, so feel free to kind of pop in the chat if you wish. But I guess I wanted to maybe start with kind of what for you, this session is kind of called Voices in or from Hong Kong, and I kind of wanted to start with what for you guys all makes kind of a Hong Kong voice, and how has the way that you write about Hong Kong changed and kind of developed over time in that relationship? Sure. Anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I suppose I'll go first. Eddie and Louise, you're still muted, by the way, I think. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah, my relationship to Hong Kong is, of course, is most of my life I've spent here. So I have a changing relationship because as I grow older, and I grew up very much during the colonial period. So for me, there's a comparison of sort of colonial and then post-colonial existence here in Hong Kong, and I do express that in my work. I mean, I was very privileged growing up here as a young Brit, and I was somehow conscious of that at the time, and I'm still conscious of it now. And I'm not a great proponent of colonialism. I think I do see the flaws in it, even though I benefited from it. So I think as I get older, I'm able to look back on that and see perhaps some of the benefits and many of the flaws as well, and I think that gets incorporated into my work. And then comparison between what's going on in recent times and the circumstances that we lived under in times gone by.
I guess everyone else is muted, so I guess I'll have to throw in my own opinions. I've been in Hong Kong for 15 years, so I've lived here longer than anywhere else. And I would say the first couple of years I was here, I was so obsessed with rediscovering my identity. I was a young man back then. And I found it easier to write about a place that existed in the past. So for me at that point, it was the confluence of being British and then also Malaysian. But I guess in the past 8 years, I've kind of felt the city pulling at me. But I've always been very aware of the fact that I am monolingual. And I think that the language really does get to me because I've always felt a kind of distance from what I think of as the kind of everyday chatter of Hong Kong. So my way of writing about it, I guess, is going to be very different from someone like Louise and Felix. And I think their voice is very, very important because, you know, you get the different layers of experience and hearing the cadences and the dissonances of that. It's changed, I think, also because I've grown older in this place and I can imbue it with a lot more emotions. So whereas I was captured with the wonder of being in Hong Kong, now I kind of feel like I've lived here long enough to kind of feel heartbroken or ecstatic or, you know, to kind of feel a lot more about what the city means to me as a person. And I've got different styles of writing about Hong Kong anyway, but in this collection, I hope to make it a lot more personal than some of the stuff that I've seen and read in the past.
I think I'll go next. Okay.
You want to follow?
Yeah, I'll go next. My understanding of the voices in Hong Kong is actually shaped by my childhood, of the people surrounding me. So you see me writing a lot about Hong Kong culture, Hong Kong tradition, Hong Kong food, because that's what my family do. I grew up in a very inter-religious family with Chinese Buddhism, Thai Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity. A lot of people, a lot of values clash together, and I've always struggled to find my own voices in my writing or in daily stuff. So I tend to speak through other people's voices, and I find these familiar voices, let's say underprivileged people, because I grew up in a lower, let's say upper lower class, something near to the middle class, but not to the middle class. Yeah, and I like to locate myself in some characters that speak for me, but also speak for the people, because English is a very privileged medium, and not everybody get to speak that. And of course, I am no longer in the bottom right now. I'm getting higher and higher with English as a tool to achieve mobility. And I don't know, I just want to speak for them because they are very important to me. Now that I get to know a lot more voices, I decide that this is the voice that I want to speak out for because it is not loud enough. As for language, to be honest, English has always been an examination language for me. I only study this language because I need to pass the exam. So at first when I write, oh, hi, you have Apple. Okay. So at first when I write, I use perfect English, but then as I write more and more, I started to experience more. And I realized that speaking in a British accent is not very natural for me. So I started speaking more like this, speaking more like a natural Hong Konger, how they would speak with 廣東話, with 粗口, with a lot of stuff. Yeah, you can call it earless, as some of our classmates, I see some of my classmates here. Yeah, we mentioned that in class. Yes, Konglish. Konglish is awesome. Yeah, I start to balance it out. Yeah, they have different vibes. If I use full colonial British English, then maybe I'm trying to find something in the past. But if I'm using Konglish, maybe I'm trying to make a statement. Who knows? Yeah. Eddie, passing it to you.
Yeah, I guess, you know, in terms of the way I write, I'm always thinking in terms of cities, life in the cities, Singapore and Hong Kong, and there's always that dual vision that I have. I mean, every moment I can't help but just check, you know, this is what Hong Kong is now, what's happening with Singapore, you know, and especially the pandemic as well, what's happening in Singapore, what's happening in Hong Kong, things like that. So there are always like two visions, and I guess my writing kind of deals with that because I in a way I'm trying to talk about the strangeness of living in cities and how in the end cities are actually very man-made, very artificial structures we live in. It's like a matrix, you know, and we have forgotten that that's the matrix we're in. So it's just learning to see that the strangeness of it all, living in a city, and the city as an expression of our desires, ambitions, and all of that. You know, so that kind of thing motivates me. And I like photography. I take pictures. I use both digital and film cameras, but I find that film cameras are actually more interesting because, you know, every row counts, and you have 36, you know, chances in one single row before you have the hassle of changing another row. And, you know, and it forces me to really just stop and look and think about what I want to capture. And I realized that, you know, all of that somehow goes into my writing. So it's a bit of a dialogue between my writing and the way I see Hong Kong and the way I see Singapore as well. So there's always a conversation between the photography and the writing. So that is kind of what drives me in the things I'm doing, yeah, in terms of writing. Yeah.
That idea of dialogue I thought is really quite interesting, but also for all of the poets, how much would you say, I mean, how does Hong Kong, does it always present when you're kind of when you're working, when you're writing, that sort of influence of Hong Kong in your writing is part of the voice that you kind of, as your poetic voice? No?
Well, if everyone's shy, I'll pop in again. Yeah, I think Hong Kong is very present in my work, and actually, the funny thing is, although there's some discussion about how much we feel that perhaps we belong to Hong Kong, I think one of the great things about Hong Kong is that it's a city of immigrants. So if you look at all the people living here, probably over 95% are either descendants of immigrants or you know, their parents or their grandparents who are immigrants, and very few indigenous people, unless you're Hakka, Tanka, Hoklo, Punte, then you are an immigrant or you're the offspring of immigrants. So for me as a Westerner, I feel that this is a city that's welcomed me. I feel just as justified to call myself a Hong Konger because I'm also an immigrant, but I've been here 61 years. I think I've paid my dues, and I reckon I am Hong Kongyan. So it does loom very large in my work. I'm always conscious of Hong Kong being a character and very present in my work.
Ironic. Hong Kong is always present in my work because I grew up here and I love this place a lot, and I can't really give up on this place. Just it means so much to me. Everybody knows the political crisis, everything. Everybody's talking about migration. Of course, I also talk about migration, even though I can't. But I just love this place so much. I would rather stay here to, keep on doing the stuff that I'm doing than go because I don't have money and because of this place. Yeah, and I think the reason why it appears so often in my work is because I follow my identity as a Hong Konger. I put it before everything else. I put it before, let's say, a female student, poet, I put myself as a Hong Konger first. So maybe that's why it pops up so often in my work. It's not just set in Hong Kong, it's about Hong Kong, it's by Hong Kong.
I'm very pleased to hear that, Louise, that a younger poet would be so committed to Hong Kong despite the challenges we have. Hong Kong has always been a place of constant change, and I recall going on long leave and coming back, and even roads were changed if you've been gone for 6 months. It's always been a place of change, and that's one of the attractive things about Hong Kong. That's why it's dynamic and a lot of energy. And there are times when we've gone through tough times, and sometimes when it's been boom times. But Hong Kong always seems to bounce back, and there's always something to offer. So I'm pleased that you feel upbeat about Hong Kong, as do I. Despite having been here for so long, I'm still very committed to Hong Kong, and I love Hong Kong, and I'm from Hong Kong. I will remain here.
We follow that, Eddie.
Well, yeah, wow. So I'm just always very, in terms of being on Hong Kong, I always think of myself as belonging to both places, Singapore and Hong Kong. So I tend to think of, even my kids, they lived in Hong Kong, for most of their lives, and and I'm trying very hard to make sure that they understand Singapore as well. And so two cities. These are the two cities that I know very well, that I grew up in. Yeah. So it's Hong Kong is my writing as much as Singapore, I would say. And I think language for me is fascinating because Cantonese in Hong Kong is kind of different from Cantonese in Singapore as well. My wife is from Singapore. She's Cantonese, but sometimes she has problems understanding Cantonese in Hong Kong as well because the slang sometimes I think is quite interesting. So that is what drives me, I guess. And because my Cantonese is sort of half baked. It's okay, but not that okay. More after 10 minutes of conversation with a taxi driver, I would just be totally lost. Yeah, but I like that because a sense of the language as sounds and melodies as well. I think that is interesting to me as well. So that drives my writing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always, I suppose out of necessity, always built myself as a transnational poet. And I guess because I've lived in 3 separate locations for so long, I kind of feel that kind of schizophrenia. But like I said, I've bedded myself in Hong Kong. My wife is Hong Kong. My son speaks Cantonese and English. I always have an affiliation to this city because of the way in which I encountered it at a time in my life. But I think also in terms of all of the cosmopolitan sentiments that I feel for myself, most of it comes from Hong Kong, because it truly is a place where I felt like I belonged. I could belong in my skin, if not perhaps with my language. And it really goaded me to write about myself and the different communities that I feel a part of in a very inclusive way. But I guess the more recent turn is there is a locality of Hong Kong in my writing, and I'm very proud of that. It's taken me so long to get there. So I hope to do it justice, and I hope to really contribute in that way.
Thank you. I was wondering if anyone had any questions from the audience to ask any one of our wonderful poets. I can read this one out if you want. What is the danger in thinking Hong Kong in terms of territory, so much to even propose nationalization of Hong Kong, as we all see how borders can inflict violence? And we have another question below. The use of Cho Hao in poetry.
Louise and I are experts in that subject.
Yes. 最撚中意講粗口㗎啦。
係啊，我識講好撚叻啊！
Like
Well,
swear
after those
words,
profanities, we don't seem to have anything else to contribute. I think the vibrancy of the language in Hong Kong is one of the exciting things, and the playful use of language here with all the various slang expressions. I think that's one of the great things. They're a very visual language, and it really enriches the experience of living here, I find.
Yeah, also on the Cho Hao question, because oh no, is my Wi-Fi okay? Yeah, my Wi-Fi is okay. Oh my god. Okay, my Wi-Fi was a little bit broken. Okay, so for the Cho Hao question, I think it's the same for every language learner. The first thing you want to learn is always the swear word. At least that's for me. When I first learned English, the first few words that I know at school with people is shit and fuck. Yeah, as even the same for like German. Yeah, because I learned German. Yeah, I feel like, and swear word, I think in a language, I don't know language, so I'm just thinking about. I feel like Cho Hao swear word in a language is so important because they are kind of expressing repressed emotion in a creative way. Yeah, you have a lot of creative swear words in Hong Kong. It's not just excuse my manner. It's not just 屌你老母. It can be 冚家產. It can be 頂你個肺插你個胃. It can be very very creative. You can write an entire poem with rhyme with just 粗口. Yeah, and I feel the thing is that it's becoming more popularized because I feel like it's liberating people to speak their truth, to speak more about their feelings, to not just be like, oh, yes, I'm very polite. I always smile with people. I bow to you when I see you. No, if I want to say fuck you, I say fuck you. If I want to say you, I say you. It's liberating human. It's liberating Hong Kongers from being so repressed with their emotion, with their thoughts, because we have a lot of censorship going on at work, at school, from politics, at home, yeah. So maybe in writing, let's say, not just poetry, in Golden Forum, in like Lindung Forum, you see people writing swear word as it is part of their daily speech, right? Sense of liberation.
I think also, if I might interject, I hope we're not monopolizing it, but also Cho Hao, I think, breaks down barriers between people. When you meet somebody, I'm a car mechanic. I go to industrial areas, and most people don't speak English at all. And then I know all the guys, and there's a bit of banter, and there's always swear words involved, and it really does break down the barriers between people. They think, oh, you're a regular person, you're prepared to swear and able to swear with some degree of skill, which I'm quite proud that I am able to do so. So I think it's more than just expressing yourself in let's say a vulgar fashion. It actually works very well to break down barriers between people of different classes.
Everybody says Cho Hao. I'm also going to answer the question on territory. Because territory itself is a very blurred term. You can't say exactly where the border is. Yeah, let's just say Wan Zai and Causeway Bay. Everybody says the bridge or Gangkyu is the border, right? But how come the fire station is still called Wan Chai Fire Station and not Causeway Bay Fire Station, even though it's like next to, like it's closer to Causeway Bay? Territory is kind of weird, and Hong Kong, as David said, is a migrant city. Yeah, everybody it's like the USA. Everybody has a crisis about where they are. Are they American? Are they Hong Konger? Do we identify ourselves with our race? Yeah, when we talk about nationalization, we also talk about the power of the nation that wants Hong Kong. We talk about decolonization of of Britain, but then we also talk about recolonization of China. So Hong Kongers have trouble locating ourselves, and that's why there's a lot of language balance going on between the two parties, or even against the people who are neutral to this, because some of them are so inclined to believe that our identity is absolute Chinese, absolute British colonial, or absolutely just Hong Konger. Everybody's having a crisis. So perhaps that's why.
We have another question, which is, what direction do you think Hong Kong English poetry is taking, especially now?
It's interesting that Felix is asking that question, because I think one of the great things that's happened in the past 2 or 3 years, I would say, and I think a lot of people who've been kind of seeing the new voices would agree with, is there's a real stakeholder amongst different generations now for writing about Hong Kong through a mixture of both English and Chinese poetry. And I think the good thing about this is, you know, it's not so much a case of we write in one language or the other. And I think this kind of working towards you know, a polyphony of different voices in both languages is actually very useful. One thing I've always wondered is, you know, what you know, our peers in the Chinese language stream are doing with writing about Hong Kong. And I think, you know, one of the movements that hopefully we'll be able to see is we'll get a lot more of that coming into the various poetry scenes. But I don't want to say too much, because I've been driving it from a very different perspective. I think maybe Louise, Dave, and Eddie have their own comments on this. Maybe Eddie, because you teach creative writing.
Well, yeah, but I always, you know, do try to emphasize that, you know, it's not just the poetry. I mean, it is the poetry, it is the language, it is the art form that is important, but at the same time, it's the community as well that is important, right? People coming together, whether physically or whether virtually, like right now, or whether it's just on journals, literary journals. You know, people congregate around different kinds of journals and all of that. So I think it is, you know, it's important for us to think about the community, the people, you know, sometimes more than just the writing. So I think the direction, I guess, is that maybe there's this awareness that there's a group of people and there's a body of writing, yes, but at the same time, there are groups of people around Hong Kong taking writing seriously, you know, interested in poetry, writing in English or in Chinese, and playing with language. I think that's a very important thing as well, right? People.
Definitely, I'm also in a creative writing class with Kalia, and a lot of my classmates are here, and just makes me feel so glad that a lot of people in Hong Kong are willing to take this step to start writing, whether it be poetry or short fiction or non-fiction. At least people are willing to use this form of medium to express something that they believe in. It doesn't have to be about Hong Kong, it can be about anything related to them. It seems important to them.
We have time for one more question if anyone has one. Otherwise, I would like to take the opportunity, if everyone could thank our poets again for reading and for being here with us tonight. Thank you all, and thanks to Jenny and to Jinhao and to Mike and everyone at the Poetics of Home Festival, and thanks to all of you for spending some time today. There are still additional events for the festival happening tomorrow. The Mapping of Desire at 12 p.m. UK time, and a couple hours later, Found in Poetry, Language, Home and Self, as well as another event on Tuesday, October 5th, Women Who Write, and you can register for all of those events at the website poeticsofhome.co.uk. So thank you everyone for joining and spending some time. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much. Good evening.